Thank you for joining the Spiritist Talk series promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm very happy to host this talk by Yuri Castro, who will be leading our live with the theme To Speak or Be Silent. Let's all give Yuri a very warm welcome, but please allow me to introduce him before he starts his presentation. Yuri Castro is a licensed clinical psychologist specialized in the treatment of severe and persistent mental illnesses in adolescents and adults. He has been residing in Florida since 2013, is married, and has two sons. Yuri has been involved in Spiritism since an early age and started giving lectures in 2012. He is a volunteer at Conscious Living Spiritist Group in North Miami, Florida, and serves as marketing director of the USSF. Please take this opportunity to send in your questions during this presentation using the chat window. Yuri has reserved time to address your comments and questions once he concludes his presentation. And now, Yuri Castro.
Good morning. Hello, Bradley. Hello, everybody who's watching us online. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Hello for those who are going to be watching us later on. The talk of today is called "To Speak or to Be Silent." It's almost like the question, to be or not to be, and we can think of what should we choose at certain points. Should we choose to speak? Should we choose to use our words, or should we choose to stay silent? And what are the benefits and the responsibilities of each one of those? So I brought some slides here, and I'm going to be sharing a little bit on the topic, and the resources are always on the top right corner of your screen. And first, this is from the book Between Heaven and Earth, where Clarencio, who is one of the characters of that book, he takes André Luis, who is the author, the spirit author of the book, and also, let's call it the main character. And so Clarencio takes André Luis to this house from this woman named Clara. And Clara has a simple house in the spirit world where she's teaching other young women about the words and the responsibility of our words and our talk and speech as a whole. So I brought a few sentences from that book here. She says, "Speech, whatever it may be, invariably entails specific electrical energies, liberating rays of a dynamic nature." So Clara here is already alluding to this idea of speech. So whenever we speak, we're liberating rays of dynamic energy, of dynamic nature. So it's interesting that the word dynamic plays a role here, because we can think of something dynamic as something that is changing, as something that not only changes itself, but perhaps changes realities and changes things around the person and others. And that's something that our speech does. And she goes even further to say, "The mind is the incessant generator of power through the positive and negative wires of the sentiment and the thought, thereby producing speech, which is an electromagnetic discharge regulated by the voice." So she's saying that before the speech, the thought comes to our minds, and with that thought, the speech is going to be of this dynamic nature, but it's going to be a translation, in a way, of our thought. Our voice can modulate speech, and she goes even further to say how we must purify our inner life, because speech, she says, speech after the mental impulse, meaning the words that came after I had that impulse, that thought to speak them, they lie at the base of creation. And that is a very interesting way of seeing speech as this tool, let's call it, that we are very, very responsible for. She even goes on to say that it is through speech that people can approach themselves, or they can distance themselves, and by the means of the voice, meaning depending on how we are using this tool, our work may be aided, or may be quickened, or it may be retarded in space and time. Again, another very interesting point for us to think about here. May be aided, or our work may be retarded in space and time, or evolution. So how are we using our speech? How are we using our words? And that's sort of the reflection that I want us all to have here today. Am I using it in ways that are helping me? In ways that are helping others? Am I trying to evolve through my word, or am I in a way delaying my own evolution because I'm not using my word correctly? I'm very, let's say, because the tongue is very quick, we know that. Am I using it in a disciplined way? So that's one of the questions that I want us to hold in our heads as we go through this talk today. And the Spirit author Emmanuel, who wrote through the hands of Chico Xavier, he's going to say that what comes out of the heart and mind through the mouth is a living, throbbing force involving the creature for good or evil, depending on the nature of the emission. So it's going to involve the creature for good or for evil, similarly to what Clara said before in the previous slide that I mentioned. We're going to attract people depending on how we're using our voice, how we are using our words, how we're using our speech, and the nature of that. Emmanuel is drawing attention here to the nature of the energy that comes through speech. He says, living, throbbing force. Meaning, what is the energy? What is the intention behind whatever it is that I'm saying? Am I saying beautiful words, but with a hint of envy? Or am I saying beautiful words, but behind them they're empty, like there's no sentiment? I'm just saying them because they need to be said, or because I think that's what the person wants to hear. That is very important for us, again, to reflect and to realize how we're using that. Moreover, he says, the psychic elements that we externalize through our mouths are powers acting on our behalf, active factors that act, and this is the same word, under our responsibility. We are responsible for what we create. We are responsible for the words that we throw out there in the wind, how we're using our speech. We are responsible for what we feel. We are responsible for what we think as well. And we know that the words come after the thought, so we are very much responsible for that. Another good author, one of my favorite ones that we can look at, is Leon Denis in the book The Problem of Life and Destiny, where he's going to say that the soul, in its deep intuitions, may have the sensation of the infinite things in which it participates and to which it aspires, to which the soul aspires. But it would seek in vain to express them with the rudiments of our feeble human language. In vain would it strive to translate eternal things into the poor language of earth. So Leon Denis is drawing our attention here, shedding light into this other area of our speech, of our words, which is exactly this idea that we're still evolving, we're still far from being pure spirits and spirits at the same level of Jesus Christ. And in our feeble human language, in the language that we use here on earth right now, it's still very much far from the language that we will one day use and the format that we will one day utilize as well. He's saying that the soul has in its deep intuitions, like inside, we feel certain things even though we can't put them into words. You wanna see? Try to, and this is the example I always like to give, try to think of love, of the sentiment of love. Now you explain to a 4-year-old what love is. Or you explain to an adult, explain to someone else how much you love your children, or how much you love your spouse, how much you love your parents, a friend, whoever. Try to explain and translate into words the exact sentiment that you feel, and I guarantee you're going to come up short. You're going to feel like you said a lot, but it's still not a perfect one-to-one reflection to what to love someone truly is. So that's something for us to realize. Okay, so my words, they will still fall short because it's still an imperfect instrument, even though the soul already has these sensations that are eternal, that are things much more subtle that our speech still cannot translate. And then he also says the word would be impotent Yet our evolved consciousness is capable of perceiving the subtle radiations of higher life. Yes, our words would be impotent. They would not translate everything that we can translate, but our consciousness is capable of perceiving the subtle radiations of higher life. Moreover, another good example here, and this is one of my favorite ones. Emmanuel, in the Book of Hope. This book, we unfortunately don't have this one in Portuguese, but he's gonna say that words are agents in the construction of all the buildings of life. The verb is the light of life, which Jesus himself used to bequeath, meaning to give or to live by, to hand down, right? To us, the renewing gospel. So in this moment here, Emmanuel is going to tell us different things that we can do to utilize our speech and how we can use our words. So let's see the little list he has here. He says how to use our verb, our words. In everyday work, be it as natural as the simple bread on the table. So in everyday work, let our speech, let our words be as natural as the simple bread on the table. So whenever we are having normal conversations, regular conversations, we must use our verb, our word, or our words. We can use plural, singular here. He's using it as no, our verb, singular. Natural is the simple bread, because the simple bread on the table does what? It satiates the hunger. It makes us, not feel hungry, but it's simple. It's something that it doesn't exaggerate. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles, because we don't need that. And in everyday work, our verb must be exactly like that. In the effective exchanges, let us use our words or our verb as pure water. So whenever we're having an effective exchange, whenever we're talking to someone that we love, whenever we're telling somebody something from our heart, let us use our words. Let us use the verb as pure water. Pure water. Look at the word choice here. Meaning transparency. Meaning that our sentiments must be transparent, must be sincere. But they also, as the water quenches the thirst. It is enough to quench the thirst. So that's how we should use it. And the other one on the list, this is my favorite, to be honest. He says, in serious moments, let us do it like the surgeon's scalpel, which prudently limits itself to the incision in the diseased area without unnecessary blows. So in serious moments, because not every moment in our lives, in this planet, in our in the state of evolution, is going to be, everything is like, pink, and everything is beautiful and happiness and no disappointments, no seriousness. There will be serious moments, but in those moments, that's when we must be very careful to use our words like the surgeon uses the scalpel, which limits itself to the incision area prudently, avoiding unnecessary blows. And I like to joke that sometimes when we're angry, when we're upset, in serious moments, in an argument, we don't use our word as the surgeon's scalpel. We use it as the lumberjack's axe. We just come and we just throw and cut whatever is in the way. And that's something that we must be mindful of. Last but not least, he says, on sad days, because there will be those, let us consider it, the verb, an efficient remedy without deviating from the dosage. Because if we take remedy, and if we take something, let's say, something simple, to cure a headache or something like that, if we overdo it, we're not going to have a good result. So on the sad days, let us use our verbs, let us use our words prudently as well as an efficient remedy to both ourselves and to others, but without deviating from the dosage, without trying to overdo it. And that's something that I really appreciate. That's why I wanted to bring this little list of different things that happen in our lives, different situations, and how we can use our verb in a much better way. because we have to think that our actions, they do have consequences, and we are responsible for those consequences. We are the authors of our own destinies. We are the ones that are responsible for everything that has happened to us so far and things that will continue to happen to us. And our verbs are tools in that walk, in that journey. I also put here the law of action and reaction is immutable for us to remember. Those around us are attracted to us based on how we behave, and how we behave you can also understand by what is coming out of my mouth. How I am behaving, how I am using the verb, using this tool that I acquired throughout thousands and thousands of years of evolution as a human spirit. And we have to think, who am I attracting? The law of action and reaction is immutable. Whatever I say, there's going to be a reaction. And whenever I throw something out there, there's going to be people attracted to me. We have learned that in question 457 of the Spirit's book that they can read, they can see our thoughts, even the things that we would try to hide. We also see that we also learned question 459, from the Spirit's book, that the spirits do influence us, and their influence on us is greater than we suppose. And I think it's such a staple question of the Spirit's book. 459. Their influence is greater than we suppose. So whenever we're having an argument, whenever we're using our words like the lumberjack's axe in those serious moments, who are we attracting? If we're addicted to gossiping, if we're just consuming content that is very low, and we're only talking about disgrace and healings and wars, and only talking about that, who do we think we're going to be attracting? If I'm only talking about addictions and earthly pleasures, who am I going to be attracting with my verb? And then we cannot blame the discarnate spirits, the lower ones, for being attracted to us. If I'm only arguing, if I'm not using my verb correctly, if I'm spreading words of hatred, of anger, who am I attracting? And that's something for us, again, to think about. Even when we think we are alone, quote unquote, alone. When we're watching, television, we're watching a sports, or we're watching some reality television, and we're criticizing the person that's on the television. So who am I going to be attracting with that sort of talk, with that sort of speech? That's something for us to think. Emmanuel then, now talking about the misuse of speech, Emmanuel is going to say, let us not forget, however, the evil chatter that always forms around us an immense family of sick and degrading elements, like lethal worms that proliferate in silent and operate in the shadows. So lethal worms that proliferate in silence, because we don't actually see what's happening around us necessarily, and operate in the shadows. So if I'm misusing my verb, if I'm doing, like he says, the evil chatter, the yapping, the slandering, the gossiping, or the words that are just words full of hatred, who am I attracting? I'm going to be attracting spirits that are also along that same lines, that also like that same thing. And he says, so rare people meditate on this, and he says, isn't the unruly verb the father of slander, gossip, frivolity, and disturbance? And then he says, God created the word, man created the talk. God gave us the speech, but we, being ignorant still, being far from perfect, yet perfectible, so we are imperfect but perfectible, we misuse the speech, so we create the talk, we create the excesses, the abuses. But he goes even further to say, if alcohol intoxicates the vicious, destroying their energy, what about the misguided tongue of good that destroys vigorous sowings of happiness and wisdom, love and peace? Is it not true? What about the misguided tongue, the unruly tongue, the indisciplined tongue that destroys vigorous sowings of happiness, of peace, of love? What is to say? We are too quick to judge alcohol intoxication, other drugs, and addiction to that. But what about the slandering? What about the gossiping? What about the verb that's always destroying peace? In the book, The Gospel According to Spiritism by Allan Kardec, 1864 publication, they talk about the verb and talk about the misuse of language of this tool, and is saying the problem is exceeding the limit of what is necessary, and then we have problems. And same thing with our bodies. If we exceed the limit of not sleeping or eating too much, what do we feel? We will have consequences, negative ones, obviously. Same thing with the verb, but it's much harder to judge because we often don't realize that we're exceeding the limit and we're misusing our verbs. But if we go to the Bible now, there's a bunch of mentions of unruly verb. And in Matthew, I brought a few here. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. The same way we're judging others, we're going to be judged. And who are we to judge other people? He even says, also in Matthew here, but the things that come out of a person's mouth, this is what Jesus said, come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, and slander. So this is in Matthew chapter 15 when Jesus is, they're arguing, saying, oh, you shouldn't be eating this because you're going to be defiled, you're going to be impure. So they had that whole debate. And Jesus is saying, in very simplistic terms here, Jesus is saying you're too worried about what you're putting inside your mouth and not what's coming out of it. You got to be more worried about what's coming out of the mouth, because what's coming out of your mouth, it's coming from the heart, and that is what defiles them. What's coming out of our mouth, because it already shows what is in our hearts. So another thing for us to think about, and connecting with the first point here about judging, we have this one in James where Jesus says, anyone who speaks ill of a brother speaks ill of the law and judges the law. And if you judge the law, you are no longer a follower of the law, but a judge. And we are no judges. We can't truly speak ill of someone else because, one, we don't know their trajectory. Two, we are also imperfect. We are also selfish. We're also prideful. So who are we to speak of ill of someone else for something that they're doing, because we don't know their trajectory? We don't know if that's already an improvement for them from a previous state. And then when we judge, we're judging from a point of arrogance. And that is also something rooted, like I said, in pride, in selfishness. Therefore, we're not judges. So we must be very careful not to judge others and not have our verbs be a misguided instrument, our tongue be this instrument of destruction. And talking about destruction, I brought a small parable or story, let's call it a small story, to illustrate some of that. And there was this, it's a fictional story, guys. There was this young woman who lived in this village, and she was somebody who loved to gossip. She loved to spread chaos, to spread the words, lies, this and that. So she loved to do that. She had a thrill doing that. But at one point, she started to lose a lot of people in her life because people didn't want to hang out with her anymore. She started seeing a lot of negative consequences because of that misuse of her verbs, of her words. Sorry. So she decided to go to a wise woman that also lived in the same village of her. A wise older woman that everybody said was a great advisor. So she went to this woman, the sage, and she says, my tongue is too unruly and indisciplined, and I want to improve on that, but I don't know how to do that because it's almost like a habit. I'm addicted to it. And the woman was just listening to her in silence and listening. And at the very end, the woman said, okay, I have a proposition for you. I have a few exercises that we can do to help you with that. The younger one said, okay, what are they? And then she's like, okay, but you're going to have to trust me in this one, okay? Sure. First, I want you to do, that's what the sage said, I want you to grab a burlap sack or a backpack or something, and I want you to go out in our village here, and I want you to collect all of birds' feathers you can find, all types of birds, but any feather you find out there, chicken, duck, geese, finch, whatever, eagle, whatever. Just grab all the feathers you can and fill a bag with feathers and come back here. The young woman didn't understand the purpose, but she said, okay, I'm going to trust this older woman. So she went and she started collecting the feathers. She took her days to fill her whole burlap sack, let's call it. So when she did that, she went back to the older woman, the wise woman, and she said, okay, it's very tiresome. I don't see the point, but here's the sack. What do I do now? I said, okay, now, actually today is a good day. It's a little windy. So what I want you to do is I want you to go to that mountain that we have here, the little peak. And once you get to the peak of that mountain, I want you to just empty your burlap sack, and then I want you to come back here. The woman also, the younger one, didn't understand at all, but she was a little grumpy. She went. She climbed the whole thing. She hiked up all the way to the top, climbing, hiking, doing all those things. When she got to the peak of the mountain, she just emptied the bag of feathers. And there were feathers going every direction imaginable. Feathers going all places, and it was actually a beautiful scene that she witnessed. But once she emptied the sack completely, she went downstairs to talk to the sage. And she said she was very tired, she was frustrated, a little grumpy, and she said, okay, I did it, so now what? What is the next step, and when are we going to start the training? I don't understand how that's going to help me with my words. And she's like, okay, did you empty all the sacks? All the sacks? She said, yes. She said, okay, now is the final moment, okay? Now is the final stage for your training. She said, the sage one said, now you grab this empty burlap sack, you go all the way back there, and you recollect all the feathers. Grab all the feathers you emptied and put them back, and come back here. And the younger woman looked at her and said, lady, are you insane? Like, I'm telling you, all the feathers went everywhere. There's no way I can collect all those feathers that were spread out, and I have no control of where they landed, and I don't even know where they are. They're up in the wind. Who knows where? I can't do that. The feathers went everywhere. And then the sage woman looked at her and she said, it's the same thing with your words. Whenever you throw them out in the wind, you have no control of where they're going to go. You have no control and knowledge where they're going to go, to whom they're going to go, and you cannot bring them back. You cannot put them back. Once they're out, they're out. And then the younger woman was silent, and this is my piece of the story. I like to think that she was not a slanderer anymore. She didn't gossip anymore. She learned with that story. And that is true. Once, if we think about it, once we throw these words out, once we spread them out, once they come out from our mouths, we cannot grab them back. We certainly wish we could do that oftentimes, but we can't. So the responsibility is ours. Let's give an example. We're transmitting this live in real time, but it's going to be a video that's going to be saved on the internet forever, and who knows who's going to watch this. I have no control or any idea who will be watching this talk. I have no control or idea who will be watching it 10 years from now, tomorrow, 5 weeks from now, in what country. I have no idea. I have no control. But I do have control of what's coming out of here, and that's the same thing that we must be aware of. Bringing back to more of the books from Spiritism, we have this one, The Living Spring, psychographed by Chico Xavier, and Emmanuel is going to say, kindness is not always appropriate in the circle of loyal conversation. Sometimes a clarifying discussion requires serene yet decided forcefulness. Nevertheless, great care in regard to comments made afterwards is indispensable. So sometimes we're going to have, like I said before, difficult conversations that are not just happy, but we must be careful what comes after, because he's going to say slander lies in wait for sincerity in order to muddy its waters and neutralize its efforts. Malice does not deserve the crown of serious discussions. Giving it too much importance in conversations actually enlarges its sphere of action. So he's saying that we may even start a difficult conversation with sincerity and trying to use our verb as the surgeon's scalpel, as we talked about previously. But we must be very careful with comments that come afterwards. Because even if we make our point, somebody else may say, okay, I see your point. You're right, I agree with you. And then we add something else that may throw all the work down in the drain. And then we see that with negotiations. We see that with family reconciliation, couples counseling. There's so many things, so many instances that we actually get to see this in our real lives too, in our own lives, where he's saying the sincerity is what can muddy its water because of our unruly tongue. It's this. Emmanuel says that slander is the subtle poison. So it's subtle because we don't actually get to see, we don't actually get to perhaps see it in effect, but it is a poison. So how should we proceed then? I've been saying that we're responsible for what we speak. We're still imperfect, so we're still learning how to speak and when to speak and the sentiment behind that, and slander and this and that. So the thought that actually inspired me to do this talk years ago, or create this talk, was something that was out of Spiritism actually. It was what it's called the triple filter of Socrates. Socrates being the wise, person, the sage that he himself was, he said, and I learned this many years ago, and I said, I gotta do a Spiritist talk regarding this because it is very much applicable. And he talked about the triple filter. So he says, before you say anything, make sure what you're going to say is going to pass through the triple filter. What is that? First one, and I mean, these are not necessarily in order, but just for the sake of learning, let's put them in order. Number one, truthfulness. Is what I'm going to say true? And I'm going to take a step further here. Can I ascertain that it's actually true? Can I actually make sure that it's true? Can I be 100% certain? Because in the world we live today with all technology, there's a lot of fake news. There's a lot of things spreading around that are not true. So if I'm going to say it, can I actually make sure that it's true? Can I actually guarantee? Number one. Number two, is it good? So the second is, the layer is goodness. What I'm going to say, is it rooted in good feelings? And even in difficult conversations. Not necessarily it's going to be good because I'm saying something that will make somebody else smile and feel so good. No, not necessarily just that. But if I'm having a difficult conversation and I'm expressing how I feel, or I'm expressing something I'd like to see different, is that coming from a place of goodness? Is that coming from a sincere place? And number three, usefulness. Is it useful? What I'm about to say, is that useful? Is it going to add anything to the conversation or to the situation? Is it going to actually make a difference? And I'm going to, again, go even further here for like a sub-item of usefulness. Is it the right time to say that? Am I the right person to say that? If what we're about to say passes through this filter, Socrates will tell us, you may say it. That's it. And I dare say that if we apply this filter in our lives, we would refrain from saying so many things, and we would be much more disciplined. We would be much happier, truly happier, because we would be improving, and we're going to see this improvement. So is it true? Is it good? Is it useful? Let's try to apply this to our lives. And then if we can't say it, we go to the second part of the talk, to be silent. If we can't speak, then we don't speak. If we shouldn't speak, we stay silent. And there's a lot of benefits to that. But before, I want to bring this question from the Spirit's book, talking about the vow of silence. So let's take it to the extreme first. Question 772, it says, What is to be thought of the vow of silence prescribed by certain sects from the very earliest times? What is thought of that? It's prescribed by certain sects. And they're going to say, the spirits are going to answer by saying, you should rather ask yourselves whether speech is in nature, and why God has given it. God condemns the abuse, but not the use of the faculties he has given. Silence, however, is useful, for in silence you have fuller possession of yourself. Your spirit is freer and can then enter into more intimate communication with us. But a vow of silence is an absurdity. So a vow of silence. So if we go, okay, so I can't speak anything. I'm like that woman with the feathers. So I'm just going to stay silent. I'm just not going to speak at all. That's going to defeat the purpose. We have this instrument. Why has God given us that? Why has God allowed us to have that instrument, if not to use it? But the problem is the abuse. And by abuse, we can also think of the misuse. Not only abuse in the sense of excesses, of doing too much, but also the misuse of the instrument. Because if I don't say many things, but whenever I open my mouth is to criticize, to just poke somebody, or to throw wrong words around, then I'm not doing it in excess, but I'm doing it poorly and wrongly. But they're saying here, these people, they're also saying the same answer, but I didn't want to bring the entirety of the answer. But they also talk about how these people mean well. The people who do the vow of silence, in a way, they mean well, but it defeats the use of the instrument and also defeats the law of society, because if we all needed to live in isolated, mountains and like with the vow of silence, we wouldn't have society around us. We would each have a mountain of our own, or a cave of our own, or a beach of our own, or whatever. But that's not the case. We have society. We have our language that's necessary to interact with other incarnate spirits. Therefore, we must use that. And by the way, when I say language, I'm doing this with my mouth, but obviously ASL is also language. So communicating through using the words. And I wanted to make that very clear as well. Still on the silent piece, Joanna DeAngelis, who wrote through Devout in a small book, Happy Life, she has 2 messages that talk about silence. She says, express your ideas calmly. If the other person disagrees, remain silent and give him or her over to time, which teaches us all unhurriedly. So we express calmly. If the other person still disagrees, or they don't see the point, employ silence. And give it to time, because oftentimes, more often than not, time will solve these things. She also has on message number 25, when asked about the person, always give positive feedback. And this time you're going to be saying, what if I don't have anything good to say? Well, if this is not possible, she's going to say, because the person acts reprehensibly, keep silent or speak benevolently. Avoid aggravating his or her situation or making it more well known. Remember the feathers. I'm just going to throw this feather here, speaking ill of someone else, but just only one person heard it. Well, there's discarnate spirits that hear it. There's the incarnate one that I'm talking to that hears it, but who knows how that's going to fall? The feather, aka the words. She says, avoid aggravating his or her situation or making it more well known, meaning even if they're doing something reprehensible, why are we going to make that more well known? And then she says, you are not, I love this, I really love this. You are not an overseer of other people's behavior. An overseer of other people's behavior, and which is I say it's an unpaid role that we often take for ourselves, pointing the finger, saying, "Did you see what that person did? Oh, that person should be doing that. He should be saying that," and we're pointing the finger. We're overseeing what they're doing. And then she says here, you cannot know if yesterday's offender might now be in recovery. So let your opinions always be uplifting and your words helpful. We don't know other people's past. We don't know what challenges they have as an immortal spirit. So how can I judge? How can I speak ill of someone else? In that case, it's better to keep silent. Somebody asks me something about someone else that's been acting reprehensibly, I employ silence. Furthermore, Chico Xavier, the great medium, he told the story of the water of peace. That would be a sort of a translation. When he said that, whenever somebody irritates you, or if you're having an argument, take a glass of water and put it next to you, and you're having that argument. If somebody irritated you and you think you're gonna speak something that you may regret out of like anger, grab that glass of water, put water in your mouth, but don't swallow it. Leave the water in your mouth. And he says that while the temptation to respond angrily stays with you, keep that water in your mouth. And he says it's the water of peace. He says, let the water bathe your tongue. It's the water of peace. Because if we think about it, how many arguments would be avoided, or how many further arguments would be avoided, or a continuation of an argument would be avoided if we just employ the water of peace to use silence, because that's what it is. The water is keeping you silent. And in silence, in the silence of the Spirit, Emmanuel is going to say, the thoughts of heaven illuminate the thoughts of earth, and benevolent and wise voices speak to our ears through the inarticulate verb of inspiration. So whenever we are in silence, we can hear intuitions more easily from our spiritual benefactors. We can connect with God more easily. What do we do when we're trying to pray, for instance? Or if we're praying for just ourselves, don't we stay in silence and then we pray either out loud or with our heads? And if we may have some music in the back, which is actually good, but that's all meant to calm the mind and so we can speak to God. We have in the Bible when Jesus instructed us to go to our room, close the door, and speak to our Father who lies in secret, and our Father will hear us. That's what he's saying. For us to utilize prayer, for us to utilize silence, because we often try to speak and we live in a world that everything is trying to draw our attention. But then when in these rare moments that we come and we try to employ silence mindfully, meaning with intent as well, we can have so many benefits. We can reap so many benefits. Jesus also highlighted prudence, Emmanuel is going to say, and consideration, pointing out the richness of silence, which is up to us to use in the struggles of life. But then I have this question here for us all to think. What is it so hard to be silent? Why? It is hard. Because, the short answer, because we're still evolving. We're still imperfect. That's the short answer. We're still shaping our minds. We're still shaping our emotions. We're still shaping, our spirits. We don't have the patience necessary yet. We don't have the resignation necessary yet to oftentimes stay silent when everybody else is goading us to speak. When people are provoking us. When people are disagreeing with us. When people are saying things we don't agree with. It's so hard to exercise silence because of that. Yet, that's exactly what we must do. Because when we exercise silence, like we already talked about here, we have so many benefits that can come from that, not only for us, but for those around us. Joanna De Angelis says that many people relish in spreading bad news. Be very discreet with them. They will test your resolve with gossip. Of course, again, we're still prideful, we're still selfish, we still fall prey to temptations. So everybody else is talking, and you want to add something as well. Or people are going to try to get that from you. Hey, what do you think? Do you agree? And then you're going to say something negative. She says, in such circumstances, silence is the cotton that dampens the noise of the spread of growing evil. What a beautiful analogy here. Silence is the cotton that dampens the cotton. So it's something, fluffy, something light, something that, it's innocuous. Dampening the noise of the growing evil. Something malicious, something negative, something bad. And cotton being just like silence. It's like a plume, like a feather in a way as well. Last but not least, I wanted to leave us with this message here that says, whatever difficulty you find yourself in, Emmanuel is saying this, refrain from carrying the burden of afflictions and unresolved questions. Penetrate the silence of your own soul. Listen to the thoughts that come from your own being, and you will recognize that the fundamental solution to all of life's problems will come from yourself, will come from within. But we don't have that discipline to be silent. But when we're when we're in these moments of affliction, that's exactly what we must do. Stay silent, not spread evil. Pray to God. Make our words go through the triple filter of Socrates, and if they don't pass through the filter, don't say them. Exercise that, even if everybody around us is not exercising that. We all have unique trajectories, but it's up to us to go either slow in our progress or go quicker. And we can do that by employing silence and being more mindful with our speech. So I wanted to leave with these reflections for us all to ponder and to think and to apply the knowledge so we can have a more fulfilling and happier life. Thank you, and have a blessed week.
Thank you very much, Yuri, for the wonderful insights and reflections you provide us today. Please, everyone, stay with us for the Q&A session, which we will start shortly after these important announcements. The United States Spiritist Federation's 19th U.S. Spiritist Symposium took place on September 20th, 2025 in Ann Arbor, Michigan. This year's theme was The Evolution of Consciousness, a Path Towards Enlightenment. Good news is all the talks, panels, and Q&A sessions are now available on the USSF YouTube channel. Check them out, please. And be certain to check out the continuing podcast-like series, Psychology and Spirituality, A Bridge to a Better Life, based on the works by Joanna Giangelis. A new episode appears every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. It is available on YouTube and Spotify. And there is a new book, The Spiritist Review, 1866, by Allan Kardec. It is available at the spiritistbooks.us store. And please check out the wonderful Spiritist app, Be My Hope, which is available from the App Store and Google Play. This app offers uplifting content in a collection of videos, daily messages, and audio materials. Please download it today. And there is available 7 free, professionally recorded Spiritist audiobooks, sponsored and produced by the Spiritist Society of the Carolinas. At your own pace, you can listen to Allan Kardec's foundational works on YouTube at the Spiritist Society Carolinas. And you will notice on the screen there is a QR code. If you wish to help the USSF produce more publications and promote Spiritism to everyone, scan the QR code on screen for your donation. Now, let's turn our attention to your comments and questions. There is still time to send in yours, so please feel free to share your thoughts. And from the U.S. Spiritist Federation, how can we silence our negative thoughts, which can still permeate the psychosphere and affect others?
I enjoy that the question has, silencing thoughts, which is something that in a way it's already silent, but it's a great question because when we all have these negative thoughts and we are again very much influenced by the incarnate ones and the discarnate spirits around us. So the way we can silence that is one, discipline, like Emmanuel say, discipline, discipline, discipline. So through study and through the practice of these things that we're talking here, these things that we learn, these things that we learn with the talks, we learn with the studies, we learn going to spiritist centers. That is the one way we can, in a way, silence, I'm going to say in quotation marks here, these thoughts. Because remember, whenever we think, we already emitted that thought. So that thought is already in the psychosphere, is already around us, and it's affecting and influencing those around us. So being mindful what we're thinking, so watch and pray, as Jesus taught us, watching and praying every time. So we're observing what we're thinking, we're praying, so we elevate our thoughts and applying through actions the things that we are learning. That's the way to discipline ourselves.
Thank you. Very, very helpful. And from Michael Hammett, I would be interested in establishing a mentor relationship to help guide me in my study of Spiritism. Is this a possibility?
So, Michael, about a mentor relationship, I imagine that you'd like to learn more about spiritism and applications and things like that. So, for that, I would recommend, if I don't know where you live, where you are, if you have the possibility of perhaps going to a spiritist center in person. If not, there are a lot of different study groups online and different ways that you can sort of get to know people and study and find the people that can help you, because there's a lot of good people and knowledgeable people that can help you navigate spiritism. But it's impossible for me to point out a single person or say that person will be your incarnate mentor or something like that, because it goes by person. But as you start to attend these things, as you start to get connected, you're going to start to see some affinity with some people, and then you can have friendly conversations. You can have things that can help you, point you in the direction of the spiritist teachings that will be applicable to your life. That's my view of it.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And from the United States Spiritist Federation, in this day of social media and online content, can we protect? How can we protect very young children from the words of others?
Interesting, because can we protect very young children from the words of others? As I'm a father of two young boys, and we try with our best intentions to shield them, or like make them live in a bubble where we protect them from everything. And it's one, impossible. Two, it's very frustrating trying to do such, because they're here for the world. They're not here for us. So we cannot protect them from the words of others, but we can do two things. And you're saying, no, the question is social media and online content. We can teach them the right things through our words and through our actions. So it doesn't matter if I tell my 6-year-old son that you can't be watching TV, like too much television, and then he comes home and I'm only watching television and I'm only doing things that I'm telling him not to do. So teaching them, guiding them through, this is what's safe, this is what not safe, because we as the adults, we know more than they, at least in this incarnation. So we should guide them, but also remember to be the example. And this comes from a clinical psychologist point, I think, that we have parents that they want the children to only do what they're saying or what they're telling them to do, but they forget that they themselves are the biggest examples for their children. So be the change, be the example for your child, and that's the best way. So not only preaching and teaching and guiding them in this age of social media, of a lot of these things that are at our disposal, but also being the example and being very careful with what they can access with their phones and all of that.
Very helpful advice. Thank you. And for the Spiritual Society of Philadelphia, how can we begin to gain the wisdom to use our human knowledge for improvement?
So how can we begin to gain the wisdom to use our human knowledge for improvement? By applying everything that we're learning, because when we're saying gain the wisdom and using human knowledge for improvement, I have to think of the improvement of the spirit, and the only way we're going to improve is by working on the virtues, the treasures that Christ always said, the treasures the treasures in heaven, the treasures that no thieves can steal, that rust doesn't corrode. Those are the ones that we must work on, the virtues of patience, of resignation, charity, humility, all those things that we're still trying to achieve, because pride and selfishness do get in the way. But gaining the wisdom to use the human knowledge, meaning the knowledge we already have in our lives, especially with the advent of spiritism, to use those things to put into practice, not only reading thousands of books, but never actually putting any of what we're learning into practice. So my invitation is practice. Put into practice.
Practice. Good thoughts. And from the United States Spiritist Federation, do we need to limit expressing ourselves on issues and concerns of the day to avoid consequences?
I'm going to say no with an asterisk. Not limiting, because when the asterisk comes from, use the filter of Socrates. That's it. So if we use if I have a concern of the day to day, or if I'm expressing myself, am I doing that out of goodness? Is it true? Is it useful? Is it the right time? Am I the right person? Of course, we have to express ourselves. As Emmanuel said, as Joanna said, not all conversations are going to be very pleasant conversations in our lives, in our day to day. Some will not be, and there's no way to avoid that. But in those situations, we can definitely express ourselves. But the limit, so limiting ourselves, that's why I said no with an asterisk, comes from the idea that we must employ our verb and our silence very wisely. Sometimes silence is going to be the best medicine. Sometimes the verb is going to be the best medicine. So it's not necessarily limiting, but employing it more wisely.
Okay, very good advice and good thoughts. Thank you, Yuri. And many thanks to everyone who's watched today's talk live and those who have been following our weekly Spiritist Talk series. Don't miss our live next Saturday, October 4th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, when the U.S. Spiritist Movement in Action will discuss the Lesson Plan Project as part of the Youth Educators Resources. Yuri, before we close the live today, would you please offer a prayer?
Surely. So for our last prayer, just going to invite whoever can in this moment close their eyes, sit comfortably, elevate our thoughts as one to our God, to our Creator, our Father in heaven. Elevate our thoughts to Jesus, our Master, the way, the truth, and the life, and the spirits, the benefactors that are always ready to help us, that are always helping us. Let us elevate our thoughts to them in gratitude for the opportunity of another day, another chance to live and to improve. And so be it.